Hello out there, everybody. Thank you for tuning in here today. Today's class is going to really focus on how we can steady our business. For those of us that are in sales and not just real estate, I'm going to focus a lot here today on real estate, but this is really a concept that's applicable to sales across the board. Now, I'm going to assume that each and every one of you out there can deliver stellar service. So I'm not going to focus on, for the sake of this course, the service itself, but I am going to focus on how to put ourselves in a position to help as many people as possible with the amazing service that we provide. And that puts us in a position to have a steady business instead of the ups and downs that most people's business looks like when they're in a sales position. Now, inevitably, in our part of the country, we're going to have some ups and downs because it's a seasonal business. We have some seasons that are just busier than others. But the way that most people's real estate business runs looks something like this. It goes up quick, and then it comes down quick, up quick, and down quick. Now, I'm putting this video together because we did a class within the Market Center a couple days ago that seemed to be really helpful. And I also had a conversation with a group of agents out in Ridgewood, New Jersey here, about a month ago. And one of the agents said to me, my challenge is that I focus a lot on getting new business. And then once I have all this business, I switch my focus and I want to make sure that I close all the business that I have. And that stops the new business from coming in. And that fits perfectly into the process that we're looking at right here, right? So what we would effectively do is what most people call prospect, where we find new people that we can help. That's here. We do that really well, some not so well, but regardless, we find new business and our business goes up. So we have some new transactions that we're working on, and then we find a place where we feel overwhelmed. And then in that moment, which is really the apex of the lead generation part, we switch our focus, and rightfully so, to the clients that we have under contract. And now we push to bring as many of them to the closing table. We have to deliver awesome service. So if we don't have a plan to keep this up while we switch our focus over to delivering, again, that service that's going to get them to the closing table, our business then comes back down. So our bank accounts in this phase may look good. But as many of you have experienced, what ends up happening is that you reach this point and you say, oh my God, I have nothing in the pipeline or very few things in the pipeline. My bank accounts look really healthy, but now I have to plan for 2, 4, 6 months of lower income while I gear things back up. So what do? You get back on the horse that you did here and you lead generate and you go up and up and up. And I will tell you this is how most people's real estate business operates. And some people have been running their business like this for 30 years straight. And it's okay. So if this is you, I don't want you to be like, oh my God, I'm doing something terribly wrong. This is okay if you don't have a plan to counterbalance, to level these ups and downs off. What I will tell you is the day that I switched my focus and began to run a pipeline-driven business instead of a pure prospecting-driven business, my business became much more steady. It became much more comfortable for me, and it put me in a position where I could go into a season and not have a lot of things closing, not have a ton of money sitting in a bank account, but feel comfortable because my pipeline looked really solid and I knew that I had a lot of new business coming on. I tell people all the time, a great example that I would use of this is if somebody were in two separate situations. In one of those situations, they would have a whole bunch of closings coming, 10 under contracts, and nothing in a pipeline, as opposed to having nothing under contract and 10, 15 in a pipeline, and personally, I would actually choose the one where my pipeline's full. I know that business is coming because it's going to give me the opportunity to work again so that I can steady that business off. I wouldn't have said that before I switched my focus over. I would have said, okay, let's make sure we close what we know and then worry about what happens. And again, that just puts us in this cycle of up and down. For those of you guys out there who've attended any of my classes, whether in person or online, you'll understand that I'm really big at working in concepts. So if I just jump in and explain to you guys tactically how to run a pipeline-focused business, I think I'd be doing you an injustice, because we could hear this over and over again and it really not impact us unless we maybe look at a comparison or how this plays out in other worlds so that we can apply it back to ours and really see how important it is to put all of our energy here. And the process that I'm about to explain for running a pipeline driven business, most of you guys do a little bit of this anyway. So most people keep a pipeline, but it's how much focus we put on it and what our priorities are in the whole process that matter. So before I jump into a comparison, I want to just do one more diagram or drawing for you so that you guys understand exactly where I'm coming from. Most real estate coaches, philosophies will look at two pieces of the puzzle when planning goals, and those I call the bookends, right? And they're really important, but to me, it's not the most important. And this is where that concept kind of shifted in my mind and really took my business to a whole nother level. So the origination of business in real estate and in most businesses is at the beginning with the prospecting. And we don't necessarily like to call it prospecting in every instance, but sometimes it's just building relationships, right? Having conversations, creating or offering value, and then in turn business comes. All of that kind of falls into this prospecting world. And through the prospecting, we end up developing business. And as good as we are at this, usually will translate to how much business we do. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum that a lot of people coach to is closings. The final step. Well, it shouldn't be your final step in the process if you have good follow-up after that, but the final step in the actual sales process. So when we look at our goal creation on an annual basis, most people coach to how many closings do you want to have? And some even take it the next step. How much money do you want to make? We back that to how many closings you want to have. And that backs into appointments and calls and how many conversations do we have to have in the prospecting sense to reach that closing table. So it's a bounce back and forth between prospecting and closing. We say, hey, I want, the team to have 275 closings this year. That's awesome. And we can drill that back to how many calls, how many contacts the individual members of that team are supposed to have in order for that to happen. And if we work hard enough on the first part of that equation, that should put us in line, if properly calculated, to hit the last part of that equation. But there's a whole chunk in the middle here that's missing. And that chunk can make things so much more efficient as we move forward and develop our business. And that is what I call the pipeline. So if we put a big P in the middle of that sales process here in the pipeline, you can see where many cases that's the part that's missed. And that's the part that results again in that up and down. So this is really just another way for me to explain what I had mentioned before in that up and down version of one's business. So we bounce back and forth between the prospecting and the closing, but we're not paying a ton of business to a ton of attention to the big P in the middle, which is our pipeline. Now, in this traditional model, our focus is on those two. In the model that I am presenting, our focus should be in the middle, which is your pipeline. That this should be your absolute 100% primary focus on feeding, I call it feed your pipeline and massage your pipeline. If you take good care of your pipeline, your closings are going to come out of it. So this becomes automatic. If you give stellar value, if you give stellar service and stellar knowledge and professional understanding to those in your pipeline, you're going to get your closings out of that. And then the first part I said, and this is the most important part, is to feed your pipeline. We all know a bunch of people who know this business inside and out. They're really possessing an in-depth understanding of business, real estate, transactional, understanding to a level that some people just could never comprehend it. And they sell one home a year. And why do they sell one home a year? Because they cannot or do not originate business in a high level. Now, on the flip side, we also know people who might not really have the most stellar service attached to their name. They might not even have a really strong understanding of what this business is supposed to look like from a transactional perspective, but yet they can come into the business and do a lot of business out of the gate, or even sometime over a long period of time, because they do this really well, and that's prospect. But you cannot feed a pipeline unless you prospect. So I said before, the first part of the pipeline is to feed it and then to massage it. So I want to make this clear, and this is where, some coaches will say, hey, this is blasphemy. You can't say you shouldn't focus on prospecting. I'm not saying you don't focus on the prospecting. I'm saying that's not your primary focus, and that you don't make the dials and the calls necessarily for appointments that day. At least the mindset wouldn't only be focused on that, but the mindset would be focused on making those conversations and those contacts in a way that's going to end up feeding our pipeline. And that makes those prospecting sessions much easier. That makes your circle calls, your sphere of influence calls much easier, because you're not really focused on just getting an appointment. That should always be a primary goal, really. I mean, if you can get on the phone and somebody has a real estate need that you can offer assistance to help them with, then of course, in that moment, you would book the appointment and consider that a super successful call. But for most people, it will be a conversation that's developing over time. And the minute that a real estate need, a perceptual real estate need develops for either that person you're talking to or for somebody they know, that should be immediately added to your pipeline. And then we add that to the pipeline. So we're always focused on the middle of this. It's going to, by default, force us to prospect, but force us in a way that is just looking to add people to that eventual pipeline. This way, when you run into somebody who says, hey, I'm not thinking of selling for 2 years, the conversation there isn't I got to remember to reach back out to them. And then you drive by their house 2 years later and someone else's sign is on the lawn and you say, oh my God, I completely forgot about that. The conversation is awesome. That gives me 2 years to develop a really strong relationship with them so that I don't have to worry about them utilizing the services of another broker, that I can in fact deliver the stellar service to them. But I am going to add them to my pipeline, and I'm going to have a way to stay in touch with them over a long period of time so that I can again solidify that relationship. Now, how does this play out in other industries? And why should we adopt that focus on the pipeline? Let's take a look for a minute at Major League Baseball. Professional sports is a really good focal point when you're trying to compare business to, because a lot of people think it's a sport, but it's truly a business, even from the sports side of things, not just the business side of things. So we take into consideration a team that I'm not particularly very fond of, the New York Yankees. So I know I got a lot of Yankees fans in my world out here. And I will tell you that from the outside, from someone who's not a fan, it's hard to watch a team win a lot, all right? There's a bit of jealousy that goes along with that in the sports world. But one thing we can say for sure is that team runs one of the strongest minor league systems in all of sports. And I'm telling you right now, a pipeline in real estate or any sales business is the exact same thing as your minor league system in any sport. Your single A, your double A, your triple A. And what happens with the Yankees is they have a really deep pipeline, so that when one of their players go out, they have 5 superstars go out in a course of a month. And these other guys step up that you've never even heard of, and they do an amazing job, sometimes even better than the person that got hurt. And year in and year out, that team is competitive because they spend a ton of time and they focus on the pipeline, on the middle of their business model, and they're constantly building that on deck position so that if somebody goes down, there's other people to move up. Or in our case of real estate, if somebody closes, there's other people to move right into that spot. Now, I'm also a fan of the New York Mets, right? And hopefully nobody on the organization here ends up seeing this video. Not that it would matter, it's just somebody's opinion. But the New York Mets, in my opinion, are probably one of the most challenged franchises in all of sports when it comes to focusing on the pipeline. The New York Mets runs their baseball operation much like most realtors run their business. And they focus again on the bookends of that business model. So when they're prospecting for new business or they're closing that business, it's a constant back and forth. Prospecting in that sport may very well be free agency, right? So it's a game of going after these free agents and paying them. You get them on board, but somebody gets hurt, which is something we as Mets fans know quite a bit about, and there's nobody else to take their place because the pipeline has been ignored. And then you find yourself in a situation where every couple of years you get a little pop, and maybe every couple of years is being a bit optimistic. But every once in a while, this actually works. You find your way to the closing table. The Mets find themselves in the World Series, right, a couple years ago. And then what happens the few years after that? Their business model of wins, losses, and successful seasons ends up looking a lot like the model we started to talk about with how realtors' business looks normally. And that is they load up on players, they get a little better. They reach the point where they're in the World Series or close to it. They have a good competitive season. A couple people get hurt, as nature would have for everybody in professional sports. And there's nobody to step up and fill those gaps. And you end up with that downfall till you get to the bottom. You're desperate. You're going to rebuild. You're going to start this thing all over again. And you do it all over again. So 2 different ways to approach business. And some approach it in a way that's focused at the middle. And some focus on the ends. And at least as far as I've seen, the most functional way, the calmest way, the easiest way to build this business is to focus on the middle of that. It just gives you one thing to really look at and do a stellar job of. And everything else is going to fall in place. The last piece of this, guys, and then I'm going to go into some fundamentals on how that pipeline could or should look. The last piece I'll tell you is this gives you, in a business where normally you have no ability to do this, it gives you the ability to predict income. If I look at my pipeline and I run a calculation over the next 3 months, 6 months, I can, with pretty solid accuracy, be able to tell what my income should be based on who's in my pipeline at a bare minimum. And of course, I could run into somebody the next day who has a real estate need, and we're going to plug them in, and that's going to be icing on the cake. But I can make informed business decisions every single day, week, month, year, with comfort knowing what my pipeline looks like. How many people are here in that apex and they're like, oh my God, I really need an assistant, but I'm afraid of being here and now having to pay somebody. Just because I'm busy now doesn't mean I'm going to be busy then. So they end up not hiring that person to assist them, and more importantly, to assist their clients in delivering stellar service. So they end up going at it themselves because of the fear of ending up here, the unknown of ending up there, and inevitably they reach that apex in the cycle, and boom, it's gonna go back down. Naturally, it has to, because you have to be in a position to pivot between service and origination of new business. So I tell you guys that if you focus heavily on the pipeline and you're at this point and you know you still have a solid pipeline, it makes those business decisions much easier. It makes them much more accurate, and it allows you to prepare and build a business understanding what's coming down the pipeline, no pun intended. So let's take a look at how functionally a pipeline could work. And I would love to take credit for this. I'd love to take credit for all of this part, but years ago, I worked with a business coach. His name was Dirk Zeller. He's actually a real estate coach, and somebody that I highly recommend anybody out there use as a coach. He is super tactical and fundamental, but he's focused on all of these little things, something that may not naturally come about in the daily activities of someone who's out there and selling at a really high level. So it's important as we take our pipelines to know who to focus on and know how to add people to it. So the pipelines, my pipelines, and I have modified what Dirk delivered to us just a little bit, but my pipelines behave in three categories. So just to make things easy, this doesn't mean that you have to have things in a million different places. I keep it super simple. And on the home screen of my phone, I have Google Sheets, and then I have all my spreadsheets in there. So real quick, I can get in and out of that in any given moment. So what do those three pipelines look like? First, seller pipeline. Second, probably guess this, buyer pipeline. And third is what I call clients in queue. That's a queue. I'm not sure if you guys can see all of that here. You go. So I got my seller pipeline, my buyer pipeline, and my clients in queue. I'm going to start with the clients in queue, and then I'm going to make my way back here just so that you guys understand the concepts here. Anybody who has a real estate need that's going to take place 9 months or further out ends up going on my clients in queue. This is somebody that I may not be in touch with or touching every single week, but it is somebody that I don't want to drop off my radar. Now, before I go any further with this part, I want you guys to conceptualize this. And this is something that I share all the time with our market center whenever given the opportunity, is that some studies were done, and the consumer, on average, and it depends on what study you read, but on average, the consumer has place in their mind for 2 people in any given industry. What does that mean? That means that if I were to ask somebody to name a dentist, and their business or their profession was not related to dentistry, by default, they would be able to give me a name of a dentist pretty quickly. That should be a given. If not, you should probably go see a dentist. If I asked them for a second dentist, a name of a second dentist, statistically, they would take a second or two, maybe a minute or two to think about that, and then still be able to deliver a dentist name or at least a location. Yeah, the guy over there on Union Ave, something like that. If we dive into statistics a little deeper, the chances are when we get to number 3, they can't think of anybody. And this is where our challenge falls a lot in the real estate world, and we don't think of it. We take our business really personally. A lot of agents, let's see how we put this in different ways. I'll use an example. An agent, let's just say, has a close friend who has a real estate need, and that close friend ends up using somebody else for their real estate need, whether it be another agent that they ran into, through needing a real estate service, or that they had a different relationship with that person too. And then the agent who did not get the opportunity to help service that client gets upset, right? They take it personally. I challenge all of you guys in the business to remove that personal connection there, because it's a lot deeper than that. And understand that the person that you're talking about who maybe chose another broker, they might trust you with their children, which they might trust 3 people on this planet with if it's a really good friend. But for whatever reason, when they thought about real estate, you didn't automatically pop into one of those 2 slots. So your mission as a realtor is to make sure that you brand yourself in the minds of the consumers in either the first slot or the second slot, so that you would at least, in most cases, get that at bat and be able to have a conversation with them regarding the service that you provide. So this is where our pipelines really come into play, because if we take for granted who it is that needs the real estate service, sometimes we won't even end up with the opportunity, because we automatically assume that they're going to select us to assist them, when actually our main goal should always be just to climb that mental ladder into the first or second slot of people they think about when they think about real estate. So anybody who's 9 months or more out from making a real estate decision, my goal is always to put them on my in-queue list, and I touch base with people here quarterly. So every quarter, when I make my estimated tax payments, I go through my clients in queue. These are people that I know are 9 months or more out. And the reason I do it every quarter is I want to build that relationship until they get there, number one. But number two, a lot of times the consumer's needs will change. Somebody who might plan on moving next spring may come into a different situation in the fall and say, hey, I got to move here. So if somebody bumps into me at a food store and says, yeah, Jimmy's graduating college in a year and a half, we're thinking of selling, so we got to talk to you then. Where most people would be like, okay, I got to remember that, and then run the risk of not remembering that. I go to the next aisle and open my phone, hit Google Sheets, put their name in, and then I have an allocated time every week where I just focus on my pipelines. And then in that moment, I can fill out the rest of their information and really take the steps I need to over the next year and a half to do what? To solidify myself in that first or second slot, so when that time comes, there's far less risk that I will not be the person that they choose to deliver that stellar service that, again, I automatically assume that we all have to go ahead and pass along to the consumer. So that's the queue. The queue is 9 months plus, real simple. That is the people that are on deck, right? This is the AA, ready to move up to AAA, before they hit the big leads. So that's my in queue. Now, seller and buyer pipelines are all then by default going to be people who have a real estate need that's going to take place within that 9 month cycle. So how do we break that down specifically to allow us to focus on the people who we need to focus on the most? And can we make this maybe fun? Can we figure out a way to create a little game here so that we can spend time and energy on the right people to get them in the right spot to move them up our pipeline so that they're ready to enter the big leagues as we move forward. Let's take a deeper look at how we would break down our seller and our buyer pipelines at the Boswell AOSA Group. 2 categories. We have our A, B, and C. Everybody, guys, that comes into the pipeline gets categorized this way. A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3. And when I say or, I mean they're going to be this and this. So one of these 3 and one of these 3. So you might have an A2, a C3, a B1, but that combination is going to guide us on who we should be focusing on most and what our next steps are. So how does this play out? Let's start with ABC. ABC is very simply how likely they are to use you. A is this is factual. 100% they're going to use you. If my mother is going to move, I'm pretty sure, let's hope, that would fall into an A category because I need to make sure somebody's an A. If I mess up here and label a B an A by accident, that could be a fatal error with that particular lead because I might end up making some different decisions in the lead follow-up process, which create a situation where I could potentially lose the B instead of knowing that I had the A. B are people that are likely to use our service. I think we can kind of understand how that process would play out. And then C is quite simply that we have no idea. So 3 categories. We absolutely know, factual, those people are going to use us. That's my best friend. It was my college roommate. They're going to use me. I don't have any fears of them walking into an open house and, getting close with some other agent and the next thing you know, writing a contract with them. I know that that's going to be my client. B is that they're very likely to use me. So that could be the biggest range in the middle. And then that could mean they said something that made you think that they're going to use you, or that you have a strong enough relationship to where you can pretty much rest assured that they're going to use you, but it's still not in that final step where you know that they're going to use you. And number 3 is you have no idea whatsoever. If I get an internet lead that comes into the team, that is going to fall into this no idea category. I don't know whether that person is going to use me. That person might not know I exist. So I want to make sure that my focus there is a little bit different than it would be on a B or certainly an A too. Now, our time frames and how this plays out. So 1 to 30 days falls into a category of a 1. 30, sorry about that, to 90 days falls into category 2. And then 90 days to 9 months falls into category 3. So if somebody is going to originate their real estate need in the next 30 days, that person's classified as a 1. If they're going to make that determination or that potential move from 30 to 90 days, they're going to be a 2. And then 90 to 9 months, they're going to be classified as a 3. So if I run into somebody that I had a really good relationship when I was younger and they said, hey, Bill, I was going to call you to sell my house. We're looking at maybe May here with everything that's going on, perhaps a little bit later. That might be a hard one because we're not sure whether to put them in the 2 category or the 1, depending on where they fall in that month or this month. And I would always say in a situation like that to lean toward the sooner side. It's always safer to focus on that sooner side. So what you end up having is a pipeline that's very simply categorized. If you do this in a spreadsheet, all you got to do is go to the top of that spreadsheet and say sort, and sort by column, alphabetical order, and it'll reorient all of your stuff based on their rankings. So you're going to have maybe 10 people in your pipeline, and maybe you'll have an A1, a B2, a C2, a A3, a B1. At any given time, pipelines can run. If you run a solid pipeline, my seller pipeline can, from time to time, flex well into the 50 plus category. So you got more than 50 people in your seller pipeline going to sell them in the next 9 months. That's a really comforting place to be in. How we manage that pipeline then becomes additionally challenging. Many of you know we also run a brokerage. So my time is not what it used to be as far as my availability to follow up on pipelines all over the place naturally. So where I used to just drive down the street and say, oh, I got to call so-and-so. Oh, I got to check in with so-and-so. Now I need to be purposeful with my time so that I have a plan and a process so no one gets missed, so that I can deliver that phenomenal service that we've created to as many people as humanly possible, and that I don't miss anybody. So as we have these all categorized, we're going to plan our sessions of lead follow-up. The book says that for whatever time you spend prospecting, you should spend half of that time lead follow-up. So if you spend 3 hours a day originating or lead generating for new business, then you should spend an hour and a half that same day in this lead follow-up phase. And at the beginning, you might not have enough business to plug that in, but I promise you, if this becomes the focus of your business, just creating, feeding, and massaging your pipelines, you will find yourself in a position with a really big pipeline really soon. So you put yourself in a spot where you're in your lead follow-up time, and that is simply, what do I have to do to massage my pipelines to move people up in rankings? When someone gets to an A, that's when they're in the number 1 slot. When someone gets to a B, that's when I know I'm probably in the number 2 slot. And when someone gets to or comes in as a C, that's when I know that I got some work to do to battle to make sure that I am one of those 2 people that they think of when they think of real estate. So if I look at a ranking coming in, I know that my Bs, my goal is to get them to an A. I know that my goal of a C is to get them up to a B. And I know that as this number ticks down from 3 to 2 to 1, my window there is closing. So the lower the number, the more urgent it is for me to focus on how do I get that person to that next level. And that is all about creating individualized follow-up service for each of them. Now I can do an entire class on just how to do that to physically take those steps to work somebody up from that C to a B to an A. But right now for this, I'm just working in concepts. I want you guys to understand how important it is to run your business here and focus here as your primary focus as you're being strategic and creating a much more level business. So as those time frames progress, again, you're constantly moving people, and that's the game that I was talking about. So you can make this fun. Your lead follow-up sessions, we sit there and I say, okay, how do I get this person from a B to an A? What can I send them today? What kind of information can I supply them? What can I offer from a value perspective so that they understand that when it comes time to list or to buy a home, that they're going to reach back out to me as their resource or source. So again, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could plug in here, but what I will leave on with this is not a 12-month newsletter, right? And this is where I think a lot of agents make a mistake too. Oh yeah, I know they're going to sell their house, so I put them on a 12-month newsletter. Your pipeline and your database are two entirely different things. The age of mass marketing, single production and then sending it out to a whole bunch of people is really getting to the point where it's a thing of the past. Most people spam that out of the gate unless you're providing something super, super valuable. But that's all database focused. So you have your pipeline. I hope you guys are okay with me erasing this. You have your pipeline here and your database here. Your touches, your 12 newsletters, your random touches here and there, your some of you guys still do a ton of print and stuff like that. That's all going to be focused on database people, right? To be able to give yourself a position to lead gen into this category and then create opportunities that are going to find their way over to your pipeline. But the pipeline itself should never, in my opinion, be automatic. Now, we do have a few tools at our disposal that allow us to create individualized content based on a specific neighborhood or home over to people in our pipeline, which kind of fit both of these as a hybrid. But I challenge you to make sure that you are taking purposeful action, individualized action at least once a week to focus on people in your pipeline. Because as we work to get them up in ranks so that they think of us in that second or first slot in their brains before it comes time to make that decision, that is going to be the difference of you running a really economical business where you might not even have to lead gen as much. Or even better, you might lead gen even more knowing now that you got a system not to let all of these pieces fall out in the middle. And that comes with a ton of power. And if on the back end of that whole equation, you have a system that is built to deliver stellar customer service, to take a potential client who needs to buy or sell and know that when they step into your ecosystem of real estate, you're going to deliver the most amazing experience that gets them where they need to be, their family safe and sound. That is a recipe for a big, big business, but not just numbers. And so many people in our business just focus on numbers. Oh, I do, 100 transactions. I got platinum. I got gold. That's not what this business really should be about. It should be how many people, how many families can you affect the lives of and change in a positive way through the service you provide? And if that number is only 5 or 10 a year because you're running this up and down business model, that's not only limiting the amount of people you can help, but that's also, in my opinion, creating a really stressful existence for you that's probably not allowing you to be the best version of yourself in every part of these categories. When you're here, is that person showing up for your clients? The same person giving the same advice, guidance, the same level of soundness, and the same level of comfort as the person who's up here? And I can't answer that question for you, only you can yourself, but I know that internally, as people go up and down those slopes, that it can create an element of stress inside that, if not for nothing, just isn't healthy. So I challenge every one of you out there to take a minute and say, not even that your business will change, because most of you are doing all of this in some sort of fashion, but to really be purposeful about making one element of your business the most important element of your business, making one element of your focus the most important element of your focus. And that is not the bookends of the business, but the middle of the business and the pipeline. And knowing that if you take incredible good care of those people in your pipeline, and that you constantly feed new people into that pipeline, what sits in front of you is an incredible business that allows you to pass that service on and help a ton more people and have a lot more fun doing so. I thank you guys for tuning in today. I might just follow this up with another teaser that gives you a lot more information on the individual parts of that follow-up program, perhaps how that could work. But most importantly, part of my passion is to make sure that I educate and teach the agent community as a whole of things that I've learned along the way to take my business to the next level and allow my life to also function at the next level, and most importantly, to deliver value to my clients at a level that I wasn't able to do before. This is probably the most profound thing that I learned along the way that took my business and just launched it to a whole new experience. So I ask that all of you take a couple minutes, sit back, let this simmer, and ask yourself, do you want to be the New York Mets, or do you want to be the New York Yankees? And regardless of who you're a fan of, who do you want to model your business after?